what makes this sport so damn great, man, is nights like that, and I said it before and I'll say it again. You can do all the analysis in the world. You could see all the video. You could break it all down, look at it, talk to the fighters, check your notes. But you'll always get surprises. That's what makes combat so unpredictable. That's what makes this sport so unpredictable. And that's what makes it so fun, man.
So this main event, Ken Flo, Georges St Pierre, Michael Bisping, just unbelievable. I mean, big picture on the show itself, right? Like if you were with us start to finish, pass through pay-per-view, for starters, you had two fighters get knocked stiff as a board. Both had a hard time coming to. Amin Zahabi and Corey Anderson on the wrong end, the spinning back elbow for Ricardo Ramos, and then Oven St. Preux with that left high kick. But then, we used replay a couple times, Kenny, after those heavyweight fights, both of those fights ending with a foul. You had Michael Bisping's cup. Not sure I've ever seen that in a title fight. So much to digest. Some of it we probably won't get to. But let's start with Georges St Pierre here. The last of three new champions crowned here at UFC 217. He joins Randy Couture, BJ Penn, Conor McGregor, the only men to win a UFC title in two divisions. But for GSP, Kenny, he does it after 4 years away from the game. And I said before the fight, far be it from me to doubt what the Michael Jordan of MMA can do on any given Saturday night, whether he's had 4 years off or otherwise. Massive night for GSP, and largely it was just great to see St. Pierre back in the octagon.
Yeah, it was indeed. And, honestly, just from seeing George perform for all these years, the 4-year layoff wasn't really the issue for me in regards to what his timing was going to be like, if he was going to be sharp, just because this is a guy who always performs when the lights are on. GSP just knows how to turn it on. He's the ultimate competitor. And for me, the issue was, how was he going to respond to adversity? How was he going to respond if he got hurt during that fight? Well, Michael Bisping definitely hurt him a couple times during that fight, landed some big shots, landed an excellent 1-2 that definitely stumbled George at one point, or at least backed him up with a couple shots. And it was the George in his prime. George just responded like the warrior that he is. This was not the guy who responded by kind of, being on vacation or sitting on his couch or whatever. This Georges St Pierre is a fighter through and through. He proved that. And as far as his performance, man, just it was vintage GSP with some new wrinkles. This was a GSP who attacked him on 3 different levels, of course, with his striking. I thought the striking, the jab especially, his ability to mix things up was confusing Michael Bisping. He landed some excellent right hands on Michael, obviously stumbled him a few times during the fight, even landed a beautiful wheel kick to the forehead of Michael Bisping. That was something relatively new from Georges St Pierre. And then, of course, the wrestling, which we knew was going to be a factor. This guy, I've seen him take down some of the best 205-pounders in the gym, so I really thought that Georges St Pierre's wrestling was going to be a major factor, even at 185 pounds. Just clean on the entry, clean on the finish for the most part. Just amazing stuff from George. And on the ground, he is as strong as a gorilla. No matter what weight class you're in, you will feel the strength of Georges St Pierre. And his ability to put the pressure on you, put the weight on you, land that grounded pound, chip away at you time and time again. And even though Michael was able to get back to his feet, he was still going to expend a lot of energy doing it. And of course, Michael always comes in tremendous shape, but it wears on you mentally, physically. And in the end, I think Michael tried to get back to his feet. I know that Danaher was working a lot on Georges St Pierre, and particularly that instance when Michael would get back to his feet, they worked a lot on taking the back. And when you're fighting someone like a Michael Bisping who is so damn tough, you don't want to go for arm locks. You don't want to go for heel hooks or leg locks, in my opinion, just because Michael won't tap to that stuff. He's that tough. And he proved it when he got the choke. He went out on his shield. He never tapped. He never thought about tapping. He was fighting all the way through. But in the end, it was the technique of Georges St Pierre getting it done with that rear naked choke. Just beautiful stuff.
And you damn well better have a good squeeze and a good rear naked choke, right? Because, Kenny, there are guys who don't have the ability necessarily to choke a guy unconscious, right? So better have a good rear naked choke because, Michael Bisping is certainly not the tap-in type. So, yeah, I mean, I thought GSP pushed through that wall when his cardio seemed to abandon him a little bit in that second round. He talked a lot about fight experience and his fight IQ and how that might help him in the fight beforehand, and it certainly did. Quickly, Kenny, in terms of him setting the trap at the end of the fight, just a nice sequence to choke Bisping unconscious ultimately. And I think for a lot of guys, maybe they don't have that in their repertoire, right? The ability to set Bisping up. He set him up on the feet, obviously, when he attacked that right side. But just talk us through a little bit Georges St Pierre's fight IQ and his ability to set the trap that ultimately led to the finish of the fight.
George is a highly intelligent fighter. This is a guy who really, for the majority of his career, was responsible for putting together all the pieces of his mixed martial arts game. He would go and train, in just wrestling. He would go and train in strictly jiu-jitsu. He'd go and train in Muay Thai or karate. And it was up to him to put it all together. Of course, Faraz started to help him later on in his career. But George did a lot of that on his own. It was just his ability to think things through, to adapt, to deal with injuries during a fight like we saw against Thiago Alves when he tore his adductor or he was going in with a knee injury or whatever it was. This is just a smart fighter who knows how to look for things in his opponent. And that's what happens when you're that well-rounded and that strong and that fast and have that anaerobic capacity like a Georges St Pierre. You could do whatever the hell you want in there. And you know what? He told Mike, he's like, I'm going to do whatever I want against you. And you know what? That's exactly what he did. It wasn't just a Georges St Pierre panicking for a takedown. He was extremely patient. He struck when he wanted to strike. He wrestled when he wanted to wrestle. And he submitted when he wanted to submit. And I was just blown away by the performance. This was a Georges St Pierre who was smart about getting him away from the fence. He never let Michael Bisping put his back to the cage where he could stand up and be safe. George was aware of that. He brought him away from the cage, got that space, and took the back immediately. Just beautiful stuff there from GSP.
And I guess George didn't know how cold-blooded he was being when he said in his post-fight interview with Joe Rogan that he targeted Bisping's right side. Of course you did, George, right? I mean, he could barely see out of that right eye. And that brings us to Michael Bisping, Kenny. Guy is just a total fucking inspiration. I don't know that I've ever been more inspired by a professional athlete in my life. I was octagon side for what he did against Anderson Silva. I've said it on these airwaves and anywhere else I can, that the last thing this guy is ever looking for is a way out. When the going gets tough, I know it sounds trite, but when that happens, right, give me Michael Bisping every day of the week, right? Like, we go on these national radio shows and they say, oh, if you had to go into a street fight with 3 UFC fighters, it's like, yeah, I want Tim Kennedy too, okay? But, like, give me this guy, man. Just built forward tough, and I just really I gain respect for him every time, he helps build a big fight week with his mouth or fights a guy like Georges St Pierre. And even though he came up short, Kenny, there were windows for him in this fight. Just a lot of respect here on Monday morning for Michael Bisping as well.
Michael Bisping absolutely is a warrior. It's in his blood. His dad was in the military in the UK. This is a guy who was born to do what he does. He's as tough as they come. He's an excellent fighter. I thought he did extremely well against Georges St Pierre. A guy who will go down as one of the greatest, if not the greatest, UFC fighter of all time. So for me, watching this fight against Michael Bisping, again, he proved his toughness. He proved his ability to adapt. Not a whole lot of guys are getting it to their feet against someone like Georges St Pierre, and Michael was able to do that a few times. And it looked like he didn't miss a step. It looked like he didn't slow down at all or get down on himself. And I think that's what makes Michael Bisping so great. This guy is fearless. He believes in himself. He's inspired me as a fighter for a very long time. He has faced the best of the best, even the guys that defeated him. You can question, maybe some of the stuff that they were using outside of the octagon. So Michael will go down as a legend as well. And for me, I would much rather see him lose against someone like a Georges St Pierre than someone like Robert Whittaker. No offense to Robert Whittaker, who's an excellent fighter, but certainly doesn't have the resume of a Georges St Pierre. So going out or losing against someone like Georges St Pierre, listen, not a big deal. For me, Michael Bisping, still one of the greatest to ever do it.
And we will table that whole greatest of all time conversation because I know a lot of our listeners don't love when we speak in absolutes. Even you push out a tweet saying that had to be the greatest night in UFC history. People tend to get irritated about that. So at some point, we will try to put into context what Georges St Pierre has been able to do. I do think when it comes to the GOAT talk, though, you have all these guys who are in consideration still fighting. So 10 years, it's going to be a very fun conversation to have. As for where Georges St Pierre goes from here, Kenny, you know, he did say in his post-fight interview with Joe Rogan, please show the replay because I don't remember the fight. And I think there were a lot of factors that led to this 4-year layoff, but he did absorb some punishment in those final 3 fights back in 2012, 2013, before he stepped away for this 4-year hiatus. What do you think the future is for Georges St Pierre? And do you think his next fight will be in defense of this UFC middleweight title?
Well, I think that for George, I wouldn't be surprised if this is his last fight. I mean, does it get any better than this? What is he going to accomplish here that's going to elevate his status that much more? Does he need to defeat the 205-pounder, maybe fight Stipe Miocic? Those aren't realistic things, okay? Even going up to 185, everybody doubted him. You know, everyone said, oh, this is going to be too much. You know, Michael Bisping has been more active. He's a bigger guy, this and that. I don't know if it gets better than this. I think there was something that George wanted to prove to himself. I really don't think, as much as, you know, George wanted to get what he felt he deserved, but I don't think it was necessarily about the money. This wasn't a Georges St Pierre who's like, man, my bank account's low. I really need to get some funds here. It wasn't about that. George is fine on money, believe me. I think more than anything else, though, I think he had something he needed to prove to himself. Being away for 4 years, I felt like he finished his career on top and wanted to come back and show everybody, listen, in these days where USADA is kind of overlooking the sport, I want to come back and show what I can really do. And, you know, at 170 pounds, he has already done it all. He wanted to do something different at 185 pounds and challenge himself. He did that against a phenomenal champion in Michael Bisping. And I think this is probably his last fight. Now, can he fight? Absolutely. He proved it. This is still a Georges St Pierre who can do it all and do it all at a very high level. He's one of the best competitors I've ever seen in all the professional sports. And if he wants to continue to fight, I think he can beat a Robert Whittaker. I think maybe there's a fight against Tyron Woodley if he wanted to. Obviously, there's that Conor McGregor guy who might make things interesting. But I know for George, he doesn't really want to go down in weight too much. I feel like he's already done it all. He feels like he's already done it all at 170 pounds. And he did it in an age where the welterweight division was just ridiculous. And I think going down against 155 pounds, I don't know if he really feels Conor McGregor is a challenge, to be honest. Going against a much smaller guy and having the takedown skills that he has.
Right.
I mean, he's gone against a lot of other great strikers in his career, and I don't think Conor McGregor is going to be big enough or has the wrestling prowess to stop the takedowns of a Georges St Pierre.
Right. Well, Saturday night certainly wasn't going to be the time to retire, right, in the octagon or at the post-fight